What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And with the final round of the 2026 AFL home and away season done and dusted, we get the time once more to sit down and reflect with another edition of the round recap. And it is one that I dread each and every season. For a handful of teams, their seasons are done. They're having exit interviews right now. They're going to find out whether they're offered contract extensions, whether they're going to be told to look elsewhere. But more importantly, from a fan standpoint, a lot of us are left in limbo. Those that didn't make the finals now have to try to side with the team if they do choose to do so in order to have any semblance of wanting to stay connected to the rest of the season. Myself personally, I am hitching my wagon to Fremantle and hoping they can pick up their first club premiership in history. But there are some teams that are contending that are real dead set chances, and I think it's not going to be as clean cut a run to the grand final as some may think. Before we reflect on the round, however, we do have a couple of points to talk about, probably outside of these games, that have been the biggest talking points, or at least noteworthy enough to talk about. First of which, and I hate to bring it up again, it links back to the Sydney 5 and the incident surrounding the hotel room and the strippers and the ongoing alleged sexual assault claims, and that's getting uglier by the minute. Comparatively from the last round recap video where we touched on it, there have been a couple of things that have kind of gone down that have compacted this a hell of a lot more. Not only were all of those players made ineligible for the All-Australian selection, they have now been announced to be not invited to the Brownlow count. Isaac Heaney's fiancée has been seen in a different state without her engagement ring on, and sponsors have been pulled. It's getting messy. And while we have to sit here and maintain innocence until proven guilty, I think it's very hard to look at this and not see all these sponsorships being stripped away. The ban from the All-Australian team, the ban for the rest of the season, the ban from the Brownlow. I think this story is about to run a hell of a lot deeper than what we, as the public, have been made aware of, and I'm not going to dive into my opinions. I do have some, but I don't think I'm in the market to be talking about those opinions without having factual evidence in front of us. And we still don't know 100% factually what happened in that hotel room, so we're not going to dive into that. But it is something that is still being actively spoken about, being actively investigated, and I think it would be silly of me as an AFL content creator, albeit as tiny a fish I am in a big vast ocean of other content creators in the AFL space, just to acknowledge the fact that that's still going on is, I think, something that isn't out of hand. But we can now turn attention to some more positive things. Essendon, for example, have announced their new coach moving forward is none other than Mark McVeigh, which I think is a brilliant signing. I was on board with him as soon as he was named as a candidate, and I feel his wealth of knowledge of the game is going to hold Essendon in such good stead. He's been doing some great things under Dean Cox at Sydney, and I think he can take that over to Essendon and apply it so incredibly well, which again brings up the Sydney 5, because apparently, even though all 5 of those players are contracted, there's rumour and speculation now circulating that all 5 of their contracts are now up in the air and they're all perceived to be gettable, and everything surrounding them is on the table. So many in the Zach Butters race, for example, are now hitching their plans to having Blakey as a potential backup. Even though he's not a midfielder, he'd be a great get. He's only 26 years old. He's still got plenty of football ahead of him. Isaac Heaney's probably the one that might be stifled a little bit because he's the one at the centre of all of this ongoing investigation, so I don't know what's going to go on with him. But the fact that we have a Sydney assistant that has now been made the Essendon head coach, does he have enough sway to maybe bring someone like a Nick Blakey over to Essendon with him? It'll be an interesting watch, but I definitely feel, as much as some Essendon fans wanted James Hird on board, they would have been taking a backward step had they had signed him. And I've spoken about it very openly on social media, and there are a lot that agree with me. I just feel the man that was at the helm during Essendon's darkest period, the drug scandal, that whole saga that went down that saw staff and players suspended, saw them miss the finals, everything in between. This is a man that had a chance and failed his club. He's been out of the system for a very long time, and a lot of people were just wanting to run off pure nostalgia. Maybe. I feel if they had signed Hurd, they wouldn't be doing themselves any favours. So the fact that they have signed Mark McVeigh, I'm incredibly stoked for them, and I'm keen to see what he can bring to that club. The biggest news, however, is in free agency, and we've already floated Zach Butters' name. There is another player in Ben King, who, to no surprise, has told the Gold Coast Suns that he will be exercising his right as a free agent to return to Victoria, with Hawthorn obviously suited as his primary destination. Zach Butters also announced to Port Adelaide, to no surprise, he will be doing the same. He's going to exercise his right to free agency. He is going to return to Victoria. There were 4 clubs all actively chasing Zach Butters, and those 4 were Collingwood, Geelong, the Bulldogs, and my boys Richmond. Since announcing he is on the table, he has apparently himself ruled Collingwood out, so the race is now down to 3, with many suggesting it's actually a 2-horse race between Richmond and Geelong, with Geelong edging just ahead. Now, my take on it, and I'm trying to do this as best as I can without wanting to be biased, because I'm a very proud Richmond man, but given the fact that Richmond's involved, some recent Regency might sneak in here, but Richmond hold the best possible hand with providing a trade for Port Adelaide that is going to satisfy both player and club. Port Adelaide have already said they will match any bid because they are not going to let him go for cheap. They don't want to just accept that pick 5 compensation pick to let him go. So any offer made to him will be instantly matched, which will force a trade. If the trade isn't done, Butters can enter the pre-season draft, and obviously with pick number 1 in hand, Essendon would probably take Zach Butters. I mean, it's a stupid move, but it would, I don't think they'd let Butters go to the draft, but it could happen. Possibility. Richmond obviously have pick 2. They also hold pick 20. Next year, you'd think their first rounder would still be in a pick of anywhere between 1 to 5, and their second rounder would probably be around that 20 mark again. I'm thinking pick 2, next year's first rounder, next year's second rounder, and maybe a South Australian like, I don't know, Liam Fawcett, Kane McAuliffe, add some youth in the way of players to the mix, ship that off to Port Adelaide. I think that gets the deal done. Port Adelaide are happy that they've brought in a wealth of first round selections. They see Zach Butters off, and Zach Butters ultimately wants to do the best for club. He has already said he wants to make sure a deal is done that makes Port Adelaide happy, and in comparison, Geelong can only offer picks within the 20s and 30s, and the VFL talent that's kind of dwindling and can't get a game isn't really setting the house on fire in that realm. So I don't know what is going to happen here. It comes down to whether he wants to be contending for premiership straight away, or whether he's happy to take some money and assign himself to a rebuild where he will be the man built around in that midfield. And that excites me as a Richmond fan. A lot of people are saying they have insider knowledge, thinking that Richmond's ahead. Some are saying Geelong. Ultimately, it's in Butters' hands, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how this plays out. As a Richmond man, I'm hoping he makes the announcement that Richmond is his destination. I will be very, very happy. But with all that news out of the way, we can now dive into the round at hand. Round 24. Thursday night football. St Kilda, Gold Coast at Marvel Stadium. In a game where I tipped St Kilda on the back of the run that the Gold Coast have had in recent months, comparatively to the smackdown St Kilda laid against Richmond only 2 weeks ago. I thought St Kilda were primed to absolutely pick the Gold Coast off. And it was the Gold Coast by 23 points in a game that I honestly feel, even though in the first term St Kilda kind of wrestled momentum their way ahead just a little bit, the Gold Coast just had answers for everything and they were untouchable. This was a Gold Coast team that did not have Christian Petrarca, and for the first time, Miller, Anderson and Rao were all best on for me in performances that absolutely eclipsed St Kilda, and I just think it's funny that all season I have been harping on about this quartet, Petrarca, Miller, Noah Anderson, and Rao, in saying that I feel on paper they could be the best midfield quartet in the competition. But each and every game, there's been one or two of them that have failed to fire. Christian Petrarca doesn't play this game. All three of these men in different aspects get off the chain. I think it is damning to the downfall of the Gold Coast. The Gold Coast were flying when Christian Petrarca was up and about early on, but then all of this shit that's happening behind closed doors, that, and I think there's a lot more than what we've been made privy to, has just stifled this team. But then Petrarca's not in the team and the Gold Coast rise to the occasion. I don't know whether that's just coincidental or not, but match timeline will break it down for you, ladies and gentlemen. 7-4-46 from the Gold Coast, led 5-1-31 at quarter time. At half time, 10-8-68, led 8-5-53. At three-quarter time, 12-16-88, led 9-6-60, and the final score saw the Gold Coast 14-19, 103, defeat St Kilda 12-8, 80. Very wayward, considering in the second half, Gold Coast only managed to kick 4 goals, but went on to kick 11 behinds, where St Kilda went on to kick 4 goals themselves, but only kicked 3 behinds. Gold Coast should have won this game by 40-50 points. Comfortably, and that is the honest gap that I feel the Gold Coast put on St Kilda throughout this game. Now, there were injuries. We had both, in the dying moments, Tom de Koning go down and dislocate his shoulder, so he's going to need a shoulder, I think it's a shoulder reconstruction they're talking. Same with Jack Silvani, but I feel Jack Silvani hurt his shoulder weeks ago and shouldn't have been playing, but still persisted in doing so, and now he requires that surgery. So, a painful end for them, and with St Kilda obviously being knocked out of wildcard contention 2 weeks ago when Carlton got up and tied with the Bulldogs, this game could have been their wildcard chance on the line, and they fumbled it against the Gold Coast anyway. So if anything had gone according to plan for them, they would have fallen down just before they got to the finish line. This game, even though, as I said, St Kilda early put on pressure, it was just defensive effort from the Gold Coast Suns that we haven't seen in a hot minute that got them over the line here. 17 tackles at 77% efficiency through their defensive 50. It was just able to turn ball over and just capitalise on the scoreboard. Both teams had 48 inside 50s apiece. St Kilda only had 10 tackles in their defensive half. So Gold Coast almost doubling the output. Both had plenty of looks inside, but obviously just turnover from St Kilda in their forward half absolutely shut the door on any chance of winning in this game, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, ladies and gentlemen. St Kilda have been one of those teams where they can mount a lot of pressure one week and then they let the pressure get to them the next, and that was definitely a case of the latter this particular week. Looking at the disposal count, it was only the Gold Coast by 5, 389 leading 384. Both teams above their average or thereabout. The kicking game was won by the Gold Coast Suns, with the handball game marginally won by St Kilda. Inside 50, St Kilda had 51, Gold Coast had 50. Both of which are just under their seasonal averages, but inside 50 efficiency is where things went absolutely haywire for St Kilda. From the 50 inside 50s that the Gold Coast had, they ran at 72% efficiency. St Kilda had 51. They ran at 47.1, which is well down on their seasonal average. It was a game that I feel in the stoppage was absolutely dominated by the Gold Coast, despite the fact that some of these numbers are a little bit closer than what the game would suggest. 45 hitouts to 28, the way of the Gold Coast Suns. Ned Moyle has really put his hand up as a genuine bona fide ruckman for this club, and I feel with all the talk about the bigger name ruckman always getting attention, and Ned Moyle could be one that clubs target to try to get in because he's developing so incredibly well. Clearances, 40 to 32, the way of the Gold Coast. Their biggest gap was at centre clearance, where they won 17 to 7. Around the contest, contested possession was only won by 5 the way of the Gold Coast, and uncontested was won by the way of 9 to the Gold Coast. The big difference here was the turnover game. As we already mentioned, defensive 50 tackles from the Gold Coast was up and about, but they took 98 marks for the game and restricted St Kilda to 77, which is down by 21 marks on seasonal average. When you have a look at marks inside 50, St Kilda only managed 9 for the game. Gold Coast took 17. Around the ground, defensive pressure, 68 to 60 tackles. So both were bringing the pressure around, but it was just the execution and the location of the tackles that were laid by the Gold Coast that they were able to just pounce on that rebound work that really just gave them looks inside. And as you see, from the 50 inside 50s they managed to score 14-19. So they scored over, 30, close enough to 40 times that they went in. And to think that almost every time they went in, they were generating some kind of score just shows the potency that this club truly has, but just the lack of continuity throughout the season has absolutely kicked them in the arse. Having a look at the individual performances for this game when it come to the voting for the final time for the home and away season, feel there were some players that were stiff, because John Noble and Bodie Hewland both had some great defensive games, I feel, but a lot of the time those players aren't getting a lot of contested ball because Gold Coast set their defensive kind of styles up on sideways and backwards kind of momentum shifting and keeping ball in hand to get better looks up forward. So stats in disposal count and marking count obviously inflate when that is happening. Very similar to St Kilda through the likes of Brad Hill and Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira. I mean, we can have a look at it here. Brad Hill has 42 disposals for the game. But if I was to break down the contested possessions, how far down would we have to look to see how many he had? Of the 42, he had 4 contested. And it's very similar, I feel, with the other two. John Noble had 40-odd disposals, only had 5 contested. And as I said, Bodie Hewland had a heap of the ball, and he only had 7 contested. So it's hard in reflection to get a gauge on whether or not they truly influence the game when they're getting so much uncontested ball and it's just easier ball movement. Maybe that's attributed to them being players that can find all that space and they use it well enough. But I mean, for that all that uncontested they had, Brad Hill did run 90% for 42. So again, they're affording him space. He's very deadly with that ball. But I would rather see contested numbers up, and I feel sometimes those players that take in the kick-ins and get the 1-2 handballs kind of stat pad a little bit. And I've said that about Nick Dacos and other players before, so don't think I'm just coming for Brad Hill and Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira and things of that nature. But as I said when we kick-started this particular match, I thought the 3 best on-ground performances went to the trio of Touk Miller, Noah Anderson, and Matt Rowell, and it was just whether or not they kind of fit into the configurations that I originally thought. So this is how I landed. I gave 1 vote to Matt Rowell. He had 28 disposals, 20 were contested, 2 marks, 8 tackles, 11 clearances, 553 metres gained, 7 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Touk Miller. Originally had him in the 3 vote, but I think Noah Anderson just eclipsed him with some of the output. Touk Miller had 40 disposals, 12 contested, 7 marks, 6 tackles, 5 clearances, 380 metres gained, 1 goal, and 5 score involvements. But Noah Anderson for me gets best on ground. 37 disposals, 8 contested, 8 marks, 2 tackles, 6 clearances, 612 metres gained, 1 goal, 12 score involvements. Let me tell you a little insider knowledge that I've kind of been let in on. If Zach Butters does choose to go anywhere but Richmond, I have it on rather good authority that Richmond have been talking to Noah Anderson's management, and whether or not Noah Anderson wants to leave the Gold Coast and go elsewhere is up in the air. With Tasmania knocking, I feel Noah Anderson would be a prime player for them to go select, because he can step up straight away into that captaincy role for them. But if Noah Anderson is gettable, especially with the fallout from what the Gold Coast have been going through, and we can't land Butters, I would happily throw anything at Noah Anderson to get him down the punt road. What did we learn out of this game? I think we learnt that apart from the lack of continuity, the Gold Coast do have a list that can do some damage. It's just whether or not they're going to be firing on all cylinders. Whether this stuff that's been happening on field, off field, is going to be sorted out in the off season. And I do feel, it almost feels like there's a ticking time bomb waiting to explode, and there's going to be some fallout. I don't know whether Ben King will be the only player to leave that club. I feel Jamara Ugle-Hagan is going to be let go. Some conjecture around maybe GWS maybe picking him up, because if Jesse Hogan and Jake Stringer leave GWS, maybe he gets opportunity there. But it's going to be an interesting watch for the Gold Coast to see how their off-season plays out. For St Kilda, they have invested all of this money into bringing top-level talent, and while Jack Silvani has been incredibly serviceable in the back line, I feel some of the other acquisitions that have been made have kind of fallen a little bit flat on their face. Liam Ryan has been serviceable. Tom De Koning has been nowhere near, at least I feel, as good as he was last season at Carlton, comparatively to what he did at St Kilda. It's going to be interesting to see how St Kilda invest in their future. Whether it's going to be still looking outward, whether it's going to be locking down the talent inward, because they had a lot of improved talent this year, and if they don't lock them down, clubs are going to come a-knocking. Friday night at the MCG saw an absolute blockbuster written on paper, because this game blew out to proportions that I did not foresee coming at all. Collingwood, Brisbane, both teams vying for finals opportunities up and down the ladder, and unfortunately, Collingwood slipping into a little bit of obscurity out of this outcome. I still don't understand how this game played out the way it did. Statistically, there are some anomalies that just don't make sense when it comes to the final score of this game. Brisbane win by 63 points. It was a game where they scored 159 points. They kicked 25 goals, 9. And yet, defensive pressure was almost half of what Collingwood dished up. I don't understand how you can put a 10-goal gap on a team when the pressure from your opposition was double what you put out, and yet you still managed to be this emphatically good. This to me, and I've been saying it for weeks, Brisbane at the start of this season had people questioning whether or not they were written off for a three-peat, and yet you could argue that the back half of the year has them solidified as one of the premiership favourites once more. I really think this core group at Brisbane is going to be one that's going to continuously challenge for premiership year after year for the next decade. They have all the young talent at their disposal. They might lose Lockie Neal to Collingwood, ironically, at the end of this season going into next. But you've got the Ashcroft boys stepping up. You've got Logan Morris finishing this year as runner-up in the Coleman medal race. There is so much to love about what this Brisbane list is building and achieving. But let's talk about this game. Let's break it down. Match timeline. Quarter time. It was anybody's game. 5-3-33 from Brisbane, leading 3-3-21. At halftime, it was only 22 points, a gap that is still very surmountable by Collingwood, but it was 10-3-63 from Brisbane, leading 6-5-41. At three-quarter time, the damage was dealt, damage was done, and at this point in time, it was just a matter of how big a margin Brisbane were going to win by. 16-703, leading 8-6-54, and the final scoreline saw Brisbane 25-9-159. Defeat 15-6-96. This is Brisbane's 16th win of the season. They have been, I don't know whether this is a typo, but the AFL website has it written down here that they have been involved in the highest scoring games this season, averaging, oh yeah, okay, so it's combined, 199.7 points per game. 200 points scored pretty much every single time they line up against somebody. This is absolutely... I just didn't think it would be this big of a gap. I honestly thought it would be a couple of goals either side. I thought Collingwood were going to bring the fight. And unfortunately, the writing was on the wall when it came to team selection, because I feel defensively Collingwood were absolutely knocked from pillar to post the last couple of weeks. No Isaac Quaynor in this game. They had no Braden Maynard. They've had no Darcy Moore for majority of the season, and just some key figures that you would normally see in that defensive half missing. And it allowed the forward half of Brisbane to get absolutely off the chain. This is Brisbane's highest score since round 11, 2024. Logan Morris kicking a bag of 8, which is the first time since 2007 that a Brisbane player has done so. You have to wind the clock back many, many years. It's almost a generational performance from this team. And while you've got, as I said, Lachie Neale, Dane Zorko, some older heads that might move on through retirement or otherwise, the young crop coming through is so incredibly strong. You can't question it whatsoever. There is a little bit of ugly fallout, though, in the way of injury, especially when it comes to wildcard round, which is what Collingwood will be playing in. Dan Houston off with a finger injury, probably a little bit more superficial than anything else. But Pendlebury was taken out of the game with a knee bursa and is set to miss the wildcard round. So that's a big blow, because while he is an older player, he still finds passages of play where time just slows around him, and he's so great with ball in hand. I can't understate the role that Scott Pendlebury plays. You see it. If you're an AFL supporter, you know how integral Scott Pendlebury can be to a game of football. Statistically breaking this game down, though, is where some shit doesn't make sense. 366 disposals from Brisbane led 355 from Collingwood. And while Collingwood had 50 more handballs, it was a gap of 61 in the way of kicking. Brisbane took 234 kicks. Collingwood only had 173. Inside 50 count, 48 to Collingwood, 59 to Brisbane. They had 11 more inside 50s, and from those 11, that's where those 10 goals came from. Scoring at a rate of 64% inside efficiency, whereas Collingwood were down to 54, 10% gap. In the stoppage, Brisbane wins the hit-out count, 49 to 36. That's not bad. It's not too big of a gap. The clearance battle, Brisbane won 51 to 35. In a game where both clubs set out to actively tag. Ed Allen had the role on Will Ashcroft, and Josh Dunkley had the role on Nick Dacos. And we'll look at Nick Dacos' numbers shortly, but he was often going to the bench. I don't know whether it was managed minutes. I don't know whether it was an attempt to just, break that kind of tag and get him on the ground elsewhere, but did not deliver to the level that we're used to seeing Nick Dacos deliver to. He was effectively squashed around the contest. I thought Josh Dunkley played an incredible role on him. Contested possession was only won by Brisbane marginally. Uncontested was won by 8 to Collingwood. Brisbane turned the ball over more than Collingwood did. The marking game, Brisbane were able to shut down a Collingwood outfit that has an average of 95 marks a game to 79. Not too big of a gap, but Brisbane ends up taking 107 marks of their own. 21 of those were inside 50. 12 of those were contested. And when you look at the defensive game, Brisbane only laid 39 tackles in the whole entire outing. Collingwood laid 65. Close enough to double the amount of defensive pressure. 13 of those 65 were laid inside 50. The pressure that Collingwood brought to this game in many other outings would be insurmountable and absolutely squash their opposition. And Brisbane win this game by 10 goals. It doesn't make sense. Make it make sense. They just overcome a lot of statistical odds and gaps. It was huge. Now, as I said, looking at the output from particular players here, Nick Dacos, as far as rating goes, he had 26 disposals, but he only had 1 tackle. He only took 1 mark. He had 5 clearances, but his player rating has him within the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Collingwood players. And there were many Collingwood and Brisbane players ahead of him on the day. We're not used to seeing Nick Daicos with such a low player rating for the number of disposals he had. What was his disposal efficiency? That's obviously had to let him down if he's so far down on the list. He ran at 69%, which isn't too bad. But he obviously had he had 12 contested. But he only had 4 score involvements. It's a very non-Nick Daicos kind of game. When it came to the votes, I feel I could make case for some players here. We could make case for Will Ashcroft, Zach Bailey, Eric Hipwood. There are a few, and I just want to talk about one player before we move on, even though he's not in vote calculation here, but Sam Swadling for Collingwood is going to be an absolute stud of a player. He racked up another 32 disposals in this game, took 6 marks. As far as running halfback intercept style players go, they have found something with Sam Swadling. He is going to be absolutely sensational for this club. He's quickly becoming one of my favourite pies to watch. But in isolation, these are the 3 Lions that I landed on for the votes this week. I gave the 1 vote to Josh Dunkley. I just thought the clamp on Nick Daicos was so influential. So much so that obviously managed minutes, coming off to the bench, limiting his output with disposal in hand, and still managed to get a decent set of numbers himself. He had 27 disposals, 11 contested, 5 marks, 6 tackles, 5 clearances, 307 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. I gave 2 votes to Lachie Neale. Could this be a Lachie Neale that we see transfer over to Collingwood? The commentary team during this game, when he went back and lined up for a shot on goal, questioned whether or not the Collingwood crowd would boo or cheer if the goal had gone through. And I think Lachie Neale complements Nick Daicos' play style so much, because you've got a clearance machine and contested ball winner in Lachie Neale going up with Nick Daicos, who likes to kind of get on the outside a little bit. And Lachie Neale feeding the ball to Daicos is going to be one hell of a combination if it comes to fruition. But Lachie Neale had 35 disposals, 22 contested, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 16 clearances, 334 metres gained, 3 goal assists, and 9 score involvements. But best on, in a career high for him, was Logan Morris. This kid finishes 2nd in the Coleman race and could be anything. This guy's going to win a handful of Colemans in his lifetime, and I, as a neutral, love seeing Logan Morris get up and about. 15 disposals, 3 contested, 8 marks, 9 tackles, 1 clearance, 254 metres gained, 8 goals, 1 goal assist, 9 score involvements. Almost everything this kid touched ended up in a score. He was so influential on this game, and to kick 8 against a fullback in Billy Frampton, who many touted as an All-Australian contender, and at the point of this recording, the 46-man squad for the All-Australian has been announced, and boy, oh boy, are we going to have some fun breaking that down during the week, so keep an eye out for that video. But what did we learn from this game? Brisbane locked themselves in to... Did they finish top 4? I think they finished 3rd, I think, which sets them in great position when it comes to jostling in that finals campaign. And I really feel the momentum they're starting to build has them primed for another grand final appearance. We know over recent years they've always found a way to get there, and their record in finals speaks for itself. For Collingwood, they have to grind it out against the Bulldogs this coming weekend in a wildcard round. The winner goes on to play in the actual finals. While the AFL is calling this wildcard final, it's essentially a bona fide week where 4 teams play off in 2 games to get 7th and 8th spot, respectively, instead of 7th and 8th just being 7th and 8th. That opens up possibility for extra couple of teams. We'll see how it plays out. We'll see whether it's a kind of concept that falls flat on its face or adds a little bit of, legitimacy. I don't think it adds legitimacy. Probably the wrong word, because a lot of people are against it. It adds a little bit of intrigue, maybe, because it opens the door to more clubs getting exposed to that finals experience. But some people are now arguing that finishing 10th and winning the premiership should have an asterisk next to it. So I'd love to know your thoughts down below. But Collingwood without Pendlebury, some players potentially to come back in. Maynard won't be one of them because he has aggravated that injury. So Collingwood up against it with some injuries. I don't know whether they've got in them to come up against the Bulldogs, who are starting to run in a rich vein of form themselves. So I feel that is definitely one hell of a game. MCG, Bulldogs and Collingwood going to be absolutely huge, but are Collingwood up to the task? They played well here. I mean, they kicked 15 goals. They scored 96 points. Any other week, that's a winnable score. But statistically, even though they had such an advantage, Brisbane were just the better team. And I don't know where that places Collingwood again. I feel they're just in limbo. And we're going to have to see whether or not they're good enough this coming weekend. Time will tell. The first on Saturday was at Marvel Stadium with Carlton hosting Fremantle, in a game where Carlton end up walking away with a 37-point win. And there have been many excuses and discussion points come out of this game. Some people suggesting that Fremantle were only running at 50% capacity. There were some players that have been rested. And you could make that argument. Given the fact that they've finished as the number 1 seed, they couldn't drop out of that spot. They've got some players that they can effectively rest or not play to full capacity to make sure come finals time they're fit and ready to go. But Carlton still looked the dominant team throughout the course of this game, regardless of whatever excuses you want to make. And statistically, have actually finished the best team in the competition since Josh Fraser took over as interim coach, but we'll get to that actual conversation momentarily. At quarter time, Fremantle led 5-2-32 to 4-5-29, and then after that, the trajectory of this game was just all Carlton all the way up. 8-7-55 led 6-8-44 at halftime, 12-8-80 led 8-10-58 at three-quarter time, and the final score line was 18-11-119, defeating 12-10-82. Speaking of that stat line with Josh Fraser, they have recorded, as I said, the best record of any side in the competition since he took over as interim coach from the 14 games that he has coached. From the 14 games, 56 premiership points were available to be had. Carlton won 46 of those 56. It is absolutely impressive, and I feel the fight back that Carlton have undertaken since he has taken over as coach should put him in the window. And I don't know whether interim coach allows it to happen this way, but I definitely feel he's going to be in the conversation for coach of the year, right? You win almost every game that you've been at the helm for with a team that was 1-8 after 9 rounds of football. They're now knocking on the door of a wildcard game against Melbourne to potentially run deeper into finals. And there's a lot of people, including Adam Simpson, that actually have Carlton in their top 4 clubs contending within this 10 club configuration for the premiership, which is absolutely wild considering the start of the year they had. They dominated the midfield absolutely 100% thoroughly. Between the 50-metre arcs, the Blues won the disposal count by 69. They won the marks by 38, uncontested possessions by 53, and clearances by 13. Between defensive 50 and forward 50. That midfield battle, they absolutely ripped apart against one of the better midfields in the competition. This is the 5th team in Fremantle for 2026 that lost the overall disposal count by more than 100, or 100 or more. The uncontested count, they lost by 90 or more, and contested possession count by 20 or more in this match. In the same game, joining Essendon, Gold Coast, Richmond, and West Coast. Let me repeat that. Fremantle became the 5th team in 2026 to lose the overall disposal count by 100 or more, the uncontested possession count by 90 or more, and the contested possession by 20 or more in a match in the same game, joining Essendon, Gold Coast, Richmond, and West Coast. Bottom 6 teams, essentially. This was a fall-off that, even if you want to make excuses about resting players and not going full tilt, where they absolutely exposed Fremantle's midfield. And in a game where they lose Brennan Cox to injury, and I feel he's had a very underrated season this year, this could be a hole that other teams now focus on. If Carlton can run a dominance like this on the midfield, can Hawthorn do the same in 2 weeks' time when they face off against Fremantle in the first final to move on to a prelim? Is Fremantle playing at home going to give them the edge to move forward, win that game, get a home prelim, walk into the grand final? Ideally, that's how you think it would play out. But it could go awry. And I think Carlton just unlocked the key to defending any chance of being able to dismantle the running machine that has been Fremantle this season. It was absolutely incredible. Breaking down the team stats, as I've just named, 413 disposals to 300, 245 kicks to 157, 168 handballs to 143. They had 52 inside 50s to 42, so they had 10 more inside 50s. At the stoppage, they lost hitouts 22 to 39, but they won the clearance 43 to 30. They had 19 to 14 centre clearance and 24 to 16 at the stoppage. Uncontested possessions, 278 to 188, 90 uncontested more. They had 22 more contested. They turned the ball over more than Fremantle did, surprisingly. The marking game, because their kicking game has become such a dominant kind of threat that they've used around. They just chip it around defensively and they launch by foot, and they have been so clean. Absolutely impressive with how they've been moving the ball. 127 marks they took, which is up from 104 seasonal average, and they kept Fremantle to 71. They took 22 inside 50 marks, and 11 of those were contested. Defensively, Fremantle did lay more tackles, 52 to 40, but I mean, when you've got 100 possessions less, you would expect to be laying more tackles if you don't have the ball in hand. This was a masterclass performance by Carlton, and what this does for this club is it gives them every belief in themselves that knocking off the number one team in the competition this year gives them every chance and should be in very much so conversation as to being able to threaten come finals. Can they win the grand final? I don't think so. I think Brisbane, I still think Fremantle better placed, but if anybody from that wildcard contention can do it, I think Carlton are now the team. And that pains me to say, because I've got some kind of PTSD with how I've been dealt with by Carlton fans personally in the past before, and I know every club has, sour apples and, it shouldn't spoil the rest of the cart, things like that, any analogy you want to use. But they've been impressive. They've been really good, and you're not going to be able to shut them up if they win this wildcard round. I don't know who's going to be more unbearable to deal with during the final series, a Carlton supporter or a Hawthorn supporter. Tell me I'm wrong. When it comes to the votes, I had a real rough time trying to break this down. I went through the list. I feel Sam Walsh is probably a little bit stiff. Luke Jackson was in conversation here. Ollie Florent, I thought, had a great game as well. George Hewitt, again, very serviceable. Brody Kemp with 3. But the 3 I landed on, I think, were the 3 best, especially from a Carlton perspective, because I have landed on 3 Blues for the votes. I gave 1 vote to Patrick Cripps. 24 disposals, 10 contested, 2 marks, 7 tackles, 8 clearances, 278 metres gained, 1 goal assist, 9 score involvements. The 2 votes I gave to Ben Ainsworth, I thought it's one of his better performances since becoming a Blue. 20 disposals, 5 contested, 10 marks, 1 tackle, 447 metres gained, 3 goals, 2 goal assists, and 9 score involvements. And best on to me was Jarga Smith. 31 disposals, 9 contested, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, 287 metres gained, 1 goal, 10 score involvements, and I think from a personal standpoint, he has wrapped up the Rising Star Award. And from a viewpoint of Smith being very gettable in that draft year, as somebody who played through Richmond's VFL, for somebody who wanted to get on Richmond's list, did we fumble by not selecting Jarga Smith? I it's yet to be seen, because I'd rather see Sam Lawler get through a full season without being injured to kind of get a gauge. But boy, does Smith look good. And, you know, what did we learn out of this game? I think we've already covered it. I think Fremantle is still the number one seed in the competition. Their best is still the best. But Carlton poked enough holes through this lineup to show where they can be exposed around the ground. And the handball game completely gets undone if you can intercept, mark, and cut them off at the piece. Because seeing them live again a few weeks ago against Melbourne, Fremantle always have a player or two further back behind the play, ready for that counter punch to come. And if it gets cut off, if the intercept gets, you know, they get walled off and those players are still left behind, that's an extra couple of players that your opponents have forward half of the ball moving forward, and you leave them in the dust. You just counter-attack so effectively. And I feel a pure kicking team can undo a team that has built their system around run and carry handballs, especially if you can maintain possession, take the sting out of the game, and get momentum on your side. And with Carlton taking on Melbourne this coming weekend, in a Melbourne outfit that now won't have Jake Lever at full back, will not have Jacob Van Ruin at full forward, this could be Carlton's time to capitalise, knock Melbourne out of the wild card, and see themselves taking on Geelong, I think it is, in the first final, which would be an absolute belter of a game to watch those two teams go head-to-head. But boy, to think after 10 rounds of football, Carlton were a bottom 4, bottom 5 team, and they're now knocking on the door of playing in the 2026 final series, I would have called you fucking crazy if you had told me this in the first half of the season. Speaking of Melbourne, the next game was at the MCG, with Melbourne hosting the Bulldogs in a game where if Melbourne won, they would have cinched a top 6 spot and would have seen different wildcard configurations go on. Melbourne winning would have actually given us a Collingwood versus Carlton wildcard, which would have been absolutely insane. And to be completely honest, the crime rate in Melbourne would have dropped severely that night. But 87 to 108. The Bulldogs win this one by 21 points in a game where I feel Melbourne was truly the better team on paper coming into it. The Bulldogs have just found a way the last month or so to just compete so incredibly well. Marcus Bontempelli comes back into this team. They could have rested him an extra week, but he ends up coming into this team in a best on ground performance, carries his team over the line. They weren't ever going to finish out of wildcard, but they might have done themselves a favour by winning this game, getting Collingwood instead of having to take on an Adelaide, and have really opened up the possibility of sneaking into finals here. This is going to be an interesting watch for both of these clubs coming out of this particular weekend, given the fact that these two clubs are the wildcard teams that we are going to be viewing. It's going to be an interesting watch this weekend. I'm really keen, not for the wildcard round and what it is for, but the 4 clubs that are in it and facing off. I think we're going to get some really great games of football. And as a neutral supporter, that's all you can ask for, right? That's all you want. But this game was all Bulldogs from the get-go. And while Melbourne got back to within a couple of kicks in the last quarter, momentum was all the Bulldogs' way from start to finish. At quarter time, they led 5-4 34 to 3-2 20. At half time, they led 7-5 47 to 5-6 36. At three-quarter time, it was 10-9 69, leading 7-12 54. And the final scoreline, as I said, 16-12 108, defeated 12-15 87. This was a game where the Bulldogs' intercept marking absolutely dismantled Melbourne. They outscored Melbourne 66 points to 23 from intercepts alone, and that's just anywhere around the ground. That's not forward 50, that's not defensive 50, that's just from intercept scoring chains. Absolutely exceptional in their defensive half, where they outscored Melbourne 65 to 10 from defensive half scores. So 66 to 23 from intercepts, 65 to 10 from defensive half chains, which is their best return from defensive half all year. And the perfect time to do it is on the eve of wildcard, where you give yourself now every hope to win a game of football and appear in finals. I don't know whether they can go on to win the whole thing, but the Bulldogs winning this game just the way they did and how defensively sound they became, this is the defensive type of setup that could dismantle a Fremantle in theory. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. As I did mention, Jake Lever does require surgery on a injury that he picked up, so he will be out for the season. Aaron Norton with an ankle injury. I don't know how severe that injury is. And Jefferson for Melbourne with a knee injury. Again, no idea on the severity of that, but one to definitely keep an eye on. Breaking down the team statistics, it was the Bulldogs 375 leading 331 in disposal. Melbourne actually had 9 more inside 50s, but only ran at 49% efficiency inside the fact. From the 50 the Bulldogs had, they ran at 60%, which is 11% better than their seasonal return. The stoppage game was absolutely monstered by Max Gawn and the Melbourne midfield. 66 hitouts to 24, 46 clearances to 37. This is a game where Bulldogs managed to find a win without Tim English in that main ruck line. And I don't know whether English comes back for finals or not, but if they can, a fresh Tim English can make all the difference, I feel. I honestly do. But Max Gawn had an absolute rip of the game. Uncontested possession, the Bulldogs led 219 to 179. 83 marks to 73. They lost the tackle count. Melbourne brought the pressure around the contest, 72 to 55. 12 of those 72 were inside 50 versus 5 of 55 from the Bulldogs. So Melbourne winning the stoppage game convincingly, bringing all the pressure around the contest, had 9 more looks inside 50, and yet the Bulldogs walk away with the win. This is a game where Melbourne would have walked out absolutely kicking themselves. From an individual standpoint, breaking down the votes for this game, some stiff. Harrison Petty, Joel Frazier, Matt Kennedy, Keziah Pickett, Jack Steele, Bailey Dale. You could have thrown a blanket over a handful that I probably could have given 1 vote to, which is why during the finals, when I do my prediction videos and my recaps and moving into seasons beyond, instead of doing a Brownlow 3-2-1 system for my best on grading, I'm going to do a coach vote system where I go 5-4-3-2-1. It's going to mean a lot more maintenance on my end to keep up with the votes, but we can get more people into the votes that way, and I feel it's a bit of a more even spread and more players can get a little bit of recognition from myself. And I know that's all subjective to my own decision making, could be completely different to yours at home, but as somebody who loves making AFL content, I feel that just adds an extra layer to what I'm doing. So, hope you guys are on board with that. But for the votes for this game, I did land on 1 vote to Ed Richards. I think he's had a sensational year. Should be in All-Australian contention. He is one of 2 Bulldogs that were nominated for the squad of 46, Marcus Bontempelli being the other, and I definitely feel Richards and Marcus Bontempelli both make the final team. That's just my hot take. But Richards had 30 disposals, 14 contested, 1 mark, 4 tackles, 8 clearances, 495 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 12 score involvements. 2 votes goes to Max Gawn, 28 disposals, 15 contested, 5 marks, 1 tackle, 59 hitouts, 10 clearances, 450 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 10 score involvements. But just edging him out, I had Marcus Bontempelli. 27 disposals, 9 contested, 11 marks, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 397 metres gained, 2 goals, 1 goal assist, and 13 score involvements. And I think we've already established what we learnt from this game. Both of these teams are going to bring something extra to this wildcard round. Melbourne facing off against Carlton, I think with some of the injuries Melbourne have sustained, could be opened up by Carlton, but the pressure that Melbourne bring could also be Carlton's undoing, and I don't think Carlton can have a 5-game stretch taking on the competition's best, where they're going to continuously be able to pick themselves around by foot. I think if Melbourne can turn the pressure gauge up, it could put Carlton into a pressure cooker that they might not be able to overcome. For the Bulldogs, they take on Collingwood, and in a battle of the midfields, I feel Bulldogs have the edge. In a battle of defenses, throw a blanket over either because they've got strengths there. In a battle of the forward lines, I think Collingwood might just nudge them out. We don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Norton. We don't know whether Tim English is going to come back. There are a lot of unknowns with the Bulldogs. But when they're playing this good, when they can nail their targets, when they can bring enough intercept game through their defensive half and shut down, you know, any forward movement from their opposition and be able to counter-attack from defensive 50 as effectively and efficiently as they did here, they could open Collingwood right up and they could be looking down the barrel of making that first week of legitimate finals, which is what I'm calling it. And I don't know whether you're going to get on board with that, but boy, these two teams brought it in this game and they're both primed for wildcard. We're eating good. Collingwood, Carlton, Melbourne, the Bulldogs. 1 week of football, 2 games, and every player is going to leave everything on the line, and all 4 teams have some absolute studs playing. It's going to be a good week of football, regardless of whether you're on board with wildcard or not. Carlton versus Melbourne, Bulldogs versus Collingwood. Fuck, I'm so excited to see how this plays out. We then shift down to GMHBA Stadium, where Geelong took on Richmond. In a game where I was hoping Richmond would show a little bit more. At quarter time, I was happy with the result. I thought Richmond was showing a lot around the contest, and then unfortunately, Geelong decided enough was enough. We're not playing around anymore. They put the foot down, and they won this game by 57 points. I did say in my tipping video that if Geelong didn't win by 10 goals, they've done themselves a disservice, and they did it comfortably in the end. There was some passages of play where they just absolutely opened Richmond up. All the Geelong players were running forward half. Richmond were caught on the counter-attack, just walking behind the ball. It's a season where, as a Richmond man, a proud Richmond man, I didn't expect much. I know we're in a rebuild. I know we're only going to win a handful of games. The injuries surmounted to an unbelievable level this year, and I can make excuses all I want, but in a good amount of games, we were just not good enough. And whether or not Uze is the issue, I think give him another year, see how 2027 plays out. If we've got a full list, we avoid injuries, and we still can't be good enough, maybe we question, the legitimacy of his coaching then. We've still got Adam Simpson on the board. We still have John Longmire on the board. We've got some great talent available as, potential head coaching. So it's not like that we're out of possibilities and people to pick from if we're looking for a successor. But it was a hard watch. This was a hard watch as a Richmond man. I watched every final siren, and it just breaks my heart to see some players try so hard and just be undone by lack of game awareness, lack of exposure to the game, and still learning things. But on the same token, there were some things to be proud of in this game, surprisingly, given the scoreline. But at quarter time, Geelong led 6-4-40 to 3-2-20. 20 points. I thought, yep, that's all right. But then at halftime, 12-6-78 led 4-5-29. Three-quarter time was 15-11-101, leading 7-6-48. And then the final score, 20-13-133, defeated 11-10-76. It was rough. It was really rough. Geelong managed to score 32 points from defensive 50 intercepts, which is the most by any team this year. The Cats' front half, they scored 32-15 from forward half intercepts. I feel the handball game of Richmond has been so prominent this year. We've been able to compete with Adelaide, with Brisbane. We've really opened up space by running the handball. But when we've gone to a long ball kicking situation, this is where shit like this happens. There were some injuries out of this game. Jack Henry for Geelong ended up with an ankle injury. Not sure on the severity, but they get a week off anyway, so he's got time to rest. Sam Banks ended up having to get rushed to hospital with an elevated heart rate, but thankfully was discharged later that night after getting it under control. But when things like that happen, my heart unironically was in my throat. We saw something very similar happen to Nate Caddy a few weeks back, and never good to see the heart brought up in any conversation point when it comes to players playing the game and having to be taken away. This was a game where Geelong dominated the disposal, 436 to 331, 218 kicks to 186, 218 handballs to 145, 66 inside 50s to 48. So they had a lot more looks inside, and the score line does justify that. Surprisingly, after a week where I cracked the shits about umpiring and the free kick count, Richmond won this free kick out 20-10, which was absolutely bewildering to me. I just honestly thought maybe that we're working overtime to make up for the fact the week before. It was fucking ridiculous. I was kind of left a little bit gobsmacked. Where I say Richmond had a little bit of shining light to take out of this game despite the scoreline, we actually won the stoppage game across the board. 44 hitouts to 33, 44 clearances to 33. We beat them at stoppage 33 to 18. And I think that's something we can truly hang our hat on as a team. If we can land Zach Butters, the team of Zach Butters and Tim Taranto could go on an absolute rip next season, and that truly excites me. I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket in case we do find out, Zach Butters is going to Geelong, as well as Toby Green, as well as Rowan Marshall. I don't know where they're getting the cap space. They're surely running out of farms to hand out, and Cotton On can only give out so many fucking sponsorships. But anyway, to win the stoppage game I thought was great. We only just lost the contested game, but the uncontested game, 299 to 184. Turnovers, 69 to 55, so we just coughed it up. They took 106 marks. We only took 71. Inside 50, though, we matched them kind of in marks inside 50, 17 to 14. 15 contested to 10, so we kind of matched them in that area. Around the contest defensively, it shames me to say it, but they had over 100 more disposals and laid 10 more tackles, but we still managed 48 for the game, which is on par with what we've done this season. So defensively speaking, in way of stoppage, we were great. It's just forward half of the ball, we struggled because it was just long bombs in. Tom Lynch is getting double teamed, triple teamed most weeks. It's not going to work. And just turning the ball over in stupid areas. There was one moment where a rush behind could have just changed the complexion of a particular scoring opportunity, but Luke Traynor, as a young kid, decided he was going to pick the ball up, kick it, it gets smothered, lands in Patrick Dangerfield's hands, and he turns around and kicks a goal straight away. Just little things like that will get better with time as Richmond's kids start to learn, about the systems of AFL level football. But I can hang my hat on some things here. It was a hard watch on the scoreboard, and just the turnover game truly took the sting out of it, and just they scored so effortlessly. But still, to see Richmond win some stats against a team like Geelong tells me that we have a team that we're on the right track with. It's just we need a system in place, and Richmond seem to be a team that lacks identity right now. We don't know what they're going to be. Maybe next year, if we've got a full complement, we have no injuries, we can start seeing a semblance of something. Maybe. Fingers crossed. For this game, I'm giving the 3 votes to the 3 highest rated, and I think deservingly so. So much so that I'm giving 1 vote to Tim Taranto, and some people might question that, but SEN actually had Tim Taranto in their best team of the week this week, so that's saying something if that went down. Tim Taranto was huge in the contest. 36 disposals, 24 of those were contested, 3 marks, 7 tackles, 10 clearances, 299 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 9 score involvements. 2 votes I'm giving to Sean Manor. 33 disposals, 11 contested, 5 marks, 7 tackles, 4 clearances, 640 metres gained, 3 goals, 2 goal assists, and 11 score involvements. And best on ground was Bailey Smith. 40 disposals, 9 contested, 5 marks, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, 863 metres gained, 3 goals, 2 goal assists, 11 score involvements. What did we learn? I think statistically breaking it down, as I said, Richmond have a list that they are on the right path with. But it's just about finding identity in the off-season, whether that's through bringing in talent, whether that's building upon the talent we've got. I eagerly await Zach Butters' decision because I feel he's going to be at either one of these clubs, and I'm hoping he lands on the wayside with Richmond. What we learned about Geelong is even though they beat up on a young Richmond team, this is a team that just have their systems locked in place. They just know where the drop of the ball is going to be. They know where the next player in the chain is going to be. They are a well-oiled machine. And with Jeremy Cameron coming back into this game, easing in off of halfback and then going forward, Max Holmes isn't completely written off to not appear during the final series coming up. If they can regain him into the team, they're going to give this a real hot push. And I can guarantee you, we're still going to see Geelong thereabouts when it comes to the preliminary finals because they find a way every damn year to be there. The last game on Saturday night was played out at Adelaide Oval with Adelaide hosting GWS. Had Carlton lost to the Bulldogs 2 weeks ago. This again would have been a game with bigger ramifications because GWS would have been in contention, knocking on the door for potential wildcard positioning if other things had fallen their way. But this was a game where Adelaide needed to win, and winning this game with Melbourne losing to the Bulldogs got Adelaide out of that bottom 4 kind of configuration from 7th to 10th for wildcard and has locked them into a top 6. So they are finally going to be appearing in finals proper, which I think is a great return given they finished first last year, they bounced out in back-to-back weeks, and they now get the chance to rebound again. And I think they've scrapped their way up there, but they deserve to be there because their pressure game this year, #1 pressure team in the comp, they have been, in part, absolutely sensational. And they've got some players on their list that are on seasonal brilliant runs. I think the last month and a half to 2 months of Isaac Rankin has been one of the best I've seen from an individual player this year. He's been huge. Breaking down the match timeline, however, this was a game that while GWS may have wrestled themselves back into it a little bit during the second and third term, it was just dominance on the scoreboard from Adelaide all the way through. There was no beating them in this game. They knew what was on the cards, and they knew exactly what they needed to do. In a 9-goal opening term, 9-2-56 led 1-4-10. At halftime, 11-5-71 led 7-8-50. At three-quarter time, 17-8-110 led 11-9-75. And full-time, Adelaide, 24-13-157 defeated GWS 15-11-101. Adelaide winning this, as I said, booked themselves a top 6 finish and a week off, so they get time to build, which I think is great. Contested possession dominance from Adelaide in this game. They won that differential by 44, which is their best return since 2018. They're on a run. They're feeling it within themselves. They rank Adelaide 12th this season from scores from centre bounce. They only average 12 points per game from centre bounce. But in this game, they won it 32. It doesn't say what they won it by. Just as they kicked a season best 32 from that. So their output in that area was absolutely fantastic. And they won the centre bounce clearances 24-13, which is quite impressive because GWS have actually been quite solid with clearance this year. So Adelaide, as I said, they knew what was on the cards. They knew what they needed to do. They didn't want to be wild card. They wanted to make sure they could lock it in proper. For Adelaide, young Taylor did a hamstring and he looked absolutely gutted on the bench. I feel so bad for him. And for GWS, Sam Taylor with a concussion, which obviously is not going to matter because they've now their season is done. But never good to see a player go down, especially with head injuries and everything surrounding that off the field. Breaking down the team stats, Adelaide 400 disposals to 330, 226 kicks to 175 was their biggest gap. 64 inside 50s to 56. Adelaide only ran at 56% efficiency inside, so they could have been a hell of a lot better. They could have been more clean and they could have been more dominant. But stoppage dominance here. 42 to 36 hitouts, 41 to 30 clearances. From centre clearance, 24 to 13. Uncontested possession, 237 to 209. Contested, 150 to 106. Around the traps, 89 marks to 64. 16 of those for Adelaide were inside 50. They laid 45 tackles, which is only 9 tackles less than what GWS did, given the fact that they gave up 70 more disposals, GWS. It was just a great outing from Adelaide. Just scoring from those centre clearances that they managed to get that dominance from is a great indication because, again, other teams over the course of this weekend that are in that finals contention were opened up defensively through that midfield core, and Adelaide just went and proved they have a team that can do that to oppositions. And with being the #1 pressure rating team in the comp, if they lay that pressure on, there's no stopping them. They can go on a run. I've said for a lot of points throughout last year and even this year, whenever they're in this kind of position, they are a real dark horse because they're such an unknown commodity. We know last year in the finals, they get bounced out in back-to-back weeks. That might not be the case this year. It could be because they're in a position where that could come back to haunt them a little bit, but they want to build on that. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder, and I think this year they just launch in a completely different light. Many players could be highlighted for votes here, and probably wild to think that Taylor Walker kicked 6 goals and I'm not giving him a vote. Jake Stringer kicked 6 in what has been confirmed to be his last game for GWS, and he's not getting a vote. But I think the 3 I landed on, just with score involvements and output on their own, I just feel like Taylor Walker kicked 6 goals, right? Let's just break this down real quick. Taylor Walker kicked 6 goals, but collectively has 10 score involvements. So he kicks 6 of those himself. So it's hard because score involvements, if you're kicking them off your own boot, then you can justify that score involvements are solid. But when I see other players that, like, they've only kicked 2 or 3 goals, but they've got 11 score involvements, 12 score involvements, I feel they've got a bigger bearing on the game from a team-based perspective. I don't know. This is where coach's voting style of 5-4-3-2-1 is much better, because Taylor Walker would have definitely gotten votes here. But I'm giving 1 vote to Ben Keys. He had 25 disposals, 8 contested, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 344 metres gained, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, 11 score involvements. Riley Thilthorpe gets the 2 votes. He had 21 disposals, 8 were contested, 9 marks, 3 tackles, 3 hitouts, 4 clearances, 428 metres gained, 3 goals, 12 score involvements, and best on Isaac Rankin. What a hell of a 2 months this guy has had. 35 disposals, 17 contested, 1 mark, 2 tackles, 12 clearances, 845 metres gained, 4 goals, 3 goal assists, 10 score involvements. And I think we've already covered our bases, right? GWS all season, I've always said, from backline to forward line, they have one of the best teams in the competition on paper. But they've been knocked from pillar to post with injury, and this is another team that has been hampered with that. Their best midfielder in Tom Green didn't even get a game this year. So that instantly changes the complexion of their midfield group, especially with Finn Callaghan and Clayton Oliver in there with him, fit and firing. Josh Kelly out on the wing to return as well, without Stringer and Hogan, who are both looking on the out this year. Could they find somebody to fill that gap? And that's where the idea of Jamara Ugle-Hagan is now being floated around as a potential get for them. I don't know, but they're going to lose a lot of forward half talent, and I think that's where they're going to regress a little bit. But I still feel at their best, GWS next year can finish in wildcard contention at the very least. For Adelaide, they now have a chance finishing in that top 6 to just play finals outright. They don't have to worry about a wildcard spot. And I just feel with what they've put together over the last few weeks, last few months, their pressure game being the best in the comp all year, on any given day, their best can dismantle anybody. The issue is with Adelaide, the gap between their best and their worst is still too far between. And if the latter part of Adelaide rock up, they're going to get absolutely ripped to shreds, and then they're out first week. So an interesting watch. But as far as the teams within the top 6 go, dark horsing Adelaide, absolutely, because statistically it just adds up. This could be their year to absolutely rip it apart. The first of 3 on Sunday was at Marvel Stadium, Essendon, Port Adelaide, in a game that had a lot of ramifications and an outcome that some have questioned. Now, Essendon obviously heading into this game, bottom of the ladder, but if they win, they match Richmond on points, and Richmond has the worst percentage of any team in the comp, so Richmond would have dropped to last place. And a lot of people are saying that Port Adelaide winning this game, and they did by 10 points, cost them potentially the best possible draft hand through trade if they were to accept a trade from Richmond for Zach Butters. Because what would have essentially happened was Richmond would have dropped to dead last, pick 1 in hand. They move pick 1 on to Port Adelaide for Zach Butters. They get pick of anybody in the draft that they want ahead of Cochrane, who they are going to use their next pick on. And once, they'd be getting 2 elite talents instead of 1. So people are questioning whether or not Port Adelaide should have just fumbled the ball a little bit and allowed Essendon to pick up the win. But it was Port by 10 in a contest that Essendon were up to their necks in for majority of. I mean, the halftime gap was probably the biggest at any point of the game, but Essendon wrestling momentum heading into the final quarter, it was anybody's game. And for 2 teams that have struggled this year, especially with Port Adelaide. No Zach Butters, no Jason Horne-Francis, backs against the wall. I honestly thought Essendon was going to get up, but it wasn't to be. At quarter time, Port Adelaide led 3-3-21 to 2-5-17. At half-time, they led 8-6-54 to 5-8-38. Three-quarter time, Essendon took the lead 9-9-63 to 9-8-62, and the final scoreline saw Port Adelaide 16-9-105 defeat Essendon 14-11-95. 7 of the last 10 goals of the game were kicked by Port Adelaide to win this, including 5 goals from centre clearance. And in this particular quarter, Jordan Sweet, ruckman for Port Adelaide, recorded a game-high 3 centre clearances and 5 score involvements. They only scored 1 behind from this source for the first 3 quarters, and to come out and score like they did in that final term from stoppage, given no Zach Butters, no Jason Horne-Francis, Jace Burgoyne had to jump into the middle for a little bit more exposure than he's used to. I think Port Adelaide fans will be very happy to see that a future without Zach Butters is going to be more tangible than some people might realise. I think they're going to be better off than what some people are suggesting. Having a look at the injuries for this game, I can't remember if there were any. Peter Wright, a knee for Essendon. A good thing their season's done, because he needs a bit of a break. He's been solid for them this year. I kind of feel he's overrated at times, but when he pops off, he is very hard to stop. Around the ground, Essendon did have more disposals, 384 to 351. Their biggest gap was the handball game, where they had 32 more. Essendon did have more inside 50s, 56 to 49. Both teams running at 53 and 55% respectively inside that forward half. The stoppage game was an absolute arm wrestle. Essendon win the hit-out count 39 to 37, but they draw dead even in the clearance game, 37 apiece. The uncontested possession, 48 more the way of Essendon, but Port Adelaide were able to just hang in tough. And again, it's not always about the amount of disposal you have, it's the quality that you can drive from that. And with 59 turnovers from Essendon, they were put to the sword. Around the contest, Essendon took 101 marks to 80, up on their seasonal average, down on Port Adelaide's seasonal average. And then tackles, 75 to 49, Essendon's way. 19 to 5 inside 50, Essendon's way. This was a game statistically that around the ground Essendon should have comfortably put them away, but it was Port Adelaide that ended up bringing home the 4 points in a game that most would have figured was dead rubber. But as I said, a lot hinged on Essendon winning, and I personally wanted Essendon to win because I feel there's a bit of a gap between pick 1 and pick 2, which I think is crazy, and you might think is crazy, but having pick 1 and getting free reign takes away the possibility of trading pick 2 to Port Adelaide for Zach Butters, and if they accept that as part of the deal, Essendon can come out and nominate Cochrane, which means Port Adelaide burn pick 2 to match the bid, whereas if we had pick 1, as I said, Port Adelaide, fresh picking out of anybody they want, then the next best, which would have been Essendon, probably goes and nominates Cochrane, and Port Adelaide still have pick 5 in hand, which they can then use to match that bid. So it just made more sense for Essendon to win this game. Unfortunately, was not to be. For the votes for this game, kind of a bit of a mixed bag here. I saw a couple that I thought might have been deserving of conversation, and again, that's where the coaches' votes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 plays into a better hand. But I think the 3 here were definitively the best on the day. You could probably make a case for Andy McGrath off of half-back for Essendon. I thought it was probably the best game he's played all year. But I did land on 1 vote to Mitch Georgiades. He had 15 disposals, 3 contested, 9 marks, 1 tackle, 142 metres gained, 5 goals, 1 goal assist, and 9 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Will Setterfield. He has been a whipping boy for Essendon's fan base, and I feel undeservingly, because whenever he has been given a chance, I feel he is one that constantly stands tall, but often finds himself on the out, and I don't know what his age is, But if he's still in his mid to late 20s and he has some football left in him, somebody else might benefit from using his talents, because I don't know whether they're going to keep him around. But he had 32 disposals, 15 contested, 7 marks, 10 tackles, 7 clearances, 1 goal assist, and 6 score involvements. And best on ground, with absence and players out injured, comes opportunity, and Jace Burgoyne came knocking. 30 disposals, 15 contested, 5 marks, 8 tackles, 7 clearances, 581 metres gained, 2 goals, 2 goal assists, 9 score involvements, and I just realised I forgot to put the metres gained in for our boy Will Setterfield. And just to let you know, the metres gained that he did have for the game, he managed a total of 468 metres gained. What did we learn out of this? I feel, as I said, for Port Adelaide, you are going to be well better placed than what some people indicate. Some people are suggesting losing Zach Butters is going to leave too big of a hole. I'm still of the personal take that by the time Tasmania rolls around, they might be able to pry Jason Horne-Francis out of there. Ties to Ken Hinkley, but future's bright, and you can link that to Essendon as well, because when Essendon have been up and about and they're right in the contest and they can lift their pressure, they have been in games. They haven't been blown out of the water. They have been competitive, and with a team that is imminently rebuilding, that has been hit with injury to some key pillars, being consistent and competitive is all you ask for. The only downside to their season this year has been the gap, once more, like other teams. The gap between their best and their worst is far greater than any other team in the competition, I feel, because some still have earmarked Essendon as the most unwatchable team this season, and to some degree, some games statistically and score-wise have worked out that way. But Essendon still have great draft hand. Who they take at pick 1 is up in the air, but getting the best available player into a young rebuilding team is always going to help you out on the pathway to success. We then go to the SCG with a game that has been so closely watched because of what has happened with the Sydney 5 and the alleged sexual assault and everything in between. Sydney hosting North Melbourne. I tipped North Melbourne, honestly thinking that the outs from Sydney were going to be too insurmountable. Heaney, Warner, Blakey, Bice, and James Jordan. They lose their tagger. So, gives opportunity for Luke Davies-Uniacke to get off the chain because Harry Sheezel didn't play in this game. And speaking of Harry Sheezel, I said earlier in the video that I'm going to do an All-Australian video where I release my team and talk about the guys that made the 46-man squad and the snubs. Harry Sheezel not getting a nomination into the 46-man squad, let alone not making the final team, is an absolute rort of the system. I've actually got a mid-season team that I put together that I'm going to show in that video. Then a team that I would have selected had 5 or 6 players that I had in my team made the 46-man squad, because not even Lockie Whitfield made that team. Sam Walsh didn't make that team. Connor Iden didn't make that team. Jack Silvani, Billy Frampton. A lot of players didn't make a nomination, and a lot of people especially calling out the snub of Harry Sheezel. But given the fact, back to this game, that all these players were missing from Sydney, all the media attention, I thought North Melbourne were ripe for the picking here. The Sydney AFLW team played prior to this and had a great showing out. 16,000 fans come in. It's the most amount of fans they've had watch them at home. There was a protest, which saw a lot of those fans leave the stadium as the men then come out to play. But this was a 53-point win to Sydney, which saw grown men show so much passion by the end of it that they broke down into tears and were bawling their eyes out. And as a neutral supporter, even though I tipped against them, I couldn't be more happier for them, because what the 5 have allegedly done, if proven to be true, is absolutely disgusting. And it's unfortunate because it's shone a negative light on the entire club and organisation when it shouldn't have. It should be just on those 5 players. And to see Callum Mills, to see Errol Goulden, to see Dane Rampy Brodie Grundy even showed emotion. Charlie Curnow wrapping up the Coleman medal for the third time and the first time as a Sydney Swan. All showing so much pride in their jumper and so much pride in each other as teammates and themselves, and just sharing that emotion was one of the most emotionally charged finishes to a game that I think I've ever witnessed. And I truly found myself in their corner barracking for them. I really did. Match timeline, it was outside of the first quarter, all Sydney's game, and it was pretty much dead by half time. At quarter time, Sydney led 4-3-27 to 3-2-20. At halftime, they led 9-7-61 to 5-5-35. At three-quarter time, they led 10-15-75 to 8-6-54. And as we have seen in true Sydney fashion, the last term was an absolute blowout. They finished 17-21-123 to 10-10-70. They won the contested possession by 26, Sydney, which is the second best differential of the season for them, and the inside 50 count, they won by 31, which is the largest differential of the season in what proved to be a game that I think they not only needed to win morally to ground themselves as a club and to get around each other, but in the scope of finals, they needed to prove that they could win without the five that were in there. And it becomes a mental game, and I think they shattered all the barriers that mental game set up and potentially provided. Injuries I'm not too sure on, so we're going to quickly do a little bit of a scope, and there were none, thank Christ, because they don't need any more fucking players missing from this team. Breaking down the team stats, it was very close given the gap on the scoreboard, and we've seen that many times, but I mean the inside 50s and everything else was absolutely blown out. 390 disposals to 372, the way of Sydney. They obviously put their biggest gap on the handball game, which they have prided themselves on. 70 inside 50s to 39. They truly limited North Melbourne in every opportunity, and from that 70 inside 50s, they ran at 57%, which is pretty damn good. In the stoppage, they beat North Melbourne up, and this is without Isaac Heaney, Chad Warner, James Jordan, all running through there. 42 hitouts to 28, 48 clearances to 31, putting a gap of 18 to 10 at centre clearance and 30 to 21 at the stoppage. Contested ball is where Sydney absolutely thrived, 146 to 119. They coughed up a lot of marks. Sydney only took 77, but they allowed North Melbourne to take 106. So North Melbourne were getting their hands on the ball, but they just weren't doing anything with it, given the fact that the disposal count was so close. But yet they put such a big gap, Sydney, on their looks inside 50. Was absolutely insane. They would have had better return too if, for the 60 inside 50s they had, they only took, or the 70, inside 50s they had, they only took 12 marks inside 50. So I think North Melbourne did well defensively to stop that run. 69 tackles to 64, so pressure was mounting from both teams, but it was just ultimately the polish of Sydney, even though they only had 18 more disposals, being able to put that gap of 70 inside 50s to 39. North are probably lucky Sydney were a little bit wayward in front of goal, and we can have a look here at, again, the main culprits. Charlie Curnow kicks 3 goals, 4. Papley kicks 1 goal, 3. Jesse Totoli kicks his first goal. I think it was his first goal, but he goes and he kicks 1 goal, 3. Tom Hanley kicks 1 goal, 2. Sheldrick only kicks it behind. Joe Sarong only kicks it behind. James Rowbottom only kicks it behind. Logan McDonald kicks 3-1. Errol Goulden only kicks it behind. So if they had their kicking boots on, this could have been well and truly 70, 80, 90 points. This could have been what they did to Port Adelaide 3 weeks ago. And that's what made this game particularly hard to turn attention to when it came to giving out the votes. Best on ground was easy, because Errol Goulden took that mantle by a mile, and if he can get a full season into his body without interruption at the level that he has played since returning from injury, I firmly believe Errol Goulden has capability of challenging for a Brownlow, because the amount of ball he gets, the meters gained, his effectiveness by foot, he is still one of the best drivers of the ball inside 50 in the entire competition. Absolutely insane. And I love watching him. He's one of my favourite non-Richmond players to watch. The 1 and the 2 vote could have gone many ways because Charlie Curnow kicks 3, but he has a handful of score involvements. Braden Campbell, I thought, played well. Brodie Grundy in the ruck was well as well. But these are the votes I landed on. And I want to premise that Sydney dominated the stoppage game without, again, Heaney, Warner, Jordan, and the 1 and 2 vote that I gave out, I've given to players that stood up in that role and I think played incredibly well in an area that they really needed to step up and just fill those shoes, and I think they did so quite strongly. 1 vote goes to James Rowbottom. I feel as a defensive midfielder, he is incredibly underrated. 19 disposals, 6 contested, 1 mark, 12 tackles, 4 clearances, 270 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 6 score involvements. 2 vote I gave to Jai Sarong. Finds himself at the start of the season on the wing, sometimes coming out of half back. Gets the chance to go into the guts this week, and I feel had some very, very big moments. 24 disposals, 10 contested, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 6 clearances, 198 metres gained, and 9 score involvements. And best on was Errol Goulden. 41 disposals, 10 contested, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 1,055 metres gained, 3 goal assists, and 8 score involvements. North Melbourne are going to be a hell of a lot more competitive next year. I definitely feel wildcard for them is well and truly on the cards, and there's been some games where they've faded out defensively, which has cost them that wildcard spot this year. And had they have made it, I think there would have been enough self-belief to push through that wildcard and make it to finals, which as an organisation would have excited the fans, would have gotten the boys up and about, and it would have been great to see as a neutral. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be this year. For Sydney, they overcame one of the biggest mental hurdles that they have had thrown at them in recent memory. And the fact that they have gone and done it here, this win pushes them into finals. Obviously, they get a week off with wildcard. We see them in a couple of weeks' time. But boy, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with because they've just given themselves enough self-belief that the unit that they have that took the field are good enough to win. And I feel that they'll win games to spite the 5 that aren't there. And if they can make the grand final and get up and win without those 5, what a statement piece that would be, because everybody wrote Sydney off, including myself, as soon as those 5 were suspended for the rest of the year. And it'd be almost fairy tale like to see that play out. Will it happen? I don't think so, but there is a realm and a universe where it does happen, and boy would everybody be in raptures if it did. The final game of the round was at Optus Stadium in a game where West Coast were unfortunately spoon-fed to Hawthorn. 62 points was the victory the way of the Hawks. I've spoken about fixturing. I'm not going to harp on about it, but I just feel some teams have been given, and you can argue they had tougher draws at the start of the season. Okay, fair enough. But I still feel finals contending teams, especially teams pushing for a top 4 finish, getting given the bottom barrel teams to finish their year off is a bit of a disadvantage to other teams competing for the same spots. Just my take. Match timeline, the worm just all the way of Hawthorn, considering Hawthorn is on the bottom that goes down, but in reality it just went all the way up. Quarter time they led 6-1-37 to 1-2-8. Half time they led 10-4-64 to 3-7-25. 3/4 time they led 13-7-85 to 4-7-31. Full time 16-11-107, defeating 6-9-45. This was as comfortable a win as Hawthorn could get, and I feel this could do 2 things. Obviously, a comfortable win builds momentum, builds self-confidence, but too comfortable a win can create complacency in where you're at. And given the fact that they have to go back to Perth next week to take on Fremantle, maybe a soft win isn't what they needed here. I feel they needed a bit of a challenge because they could get shell-shocked running into Fremantle next week. But they did enough to secure the top 4 finish. Obviously, just the percentage was not enough, given what Brisbane did to Collingwood to force Brisbane out of 3rd, which would have seen, obviously, Hawthorn and Sydney play against each other instead. Dominating field position Hawthorn in this game. They won the inside 50 count by 20 off the back of 30 forward half intercepts, which they scored 45 points from. Almost outscoring, well they did, they scored West Coast score from forward half intercepts on their own terms. Not sure if there was any injuries out of this game. I know there was a cut head from Starcevic. Harley Reid has copped a 2-week suspension for a sling tackle, which I think by definition is a sling because he grabbed the back of the jumper of Jai Newcomb and threw him down, but it wasn't a slinging motion, it was more of a pulling motion, and Jai Newcomb's back hits the ground, but there's a little bit of whiplash. Don't know whether they'll challenge that or not. But that free kick means that Harley Reid this year had 68 free kicks paid against. You need to go back a huge amount of years. I think Malcolm Blight might have been the last person to give away that many free kicks, and it was 67. And how long has it been since he played? I might be getting the player wrong, but I know you've got to go back all the way back for a player to have given that many free kicks away. And I feel that's the one thing that stops Harley Reid from taking his game to the next level. Just, he still thrives within the bullshit. When he doesn't focus on that, he's so good, but it's still there. The free kicks given away are a bit monotonous from time to time. Statistically, West Coast matched Hawthorn 368 to 362, only losing that disposal count by 6. The kicking game of Hawthorn absolutely obliterated West Coast, 236 to 196, and West Coast actually beat them in the handball game, 166 to 132. 20 more inside 50s, though, was damning with Port Adelaide. Oh, sorry, not Port Adelaide. I still got Port Adelaide on the mind. 66 inside 50s, sorry, with an inside efficiency for Hawthorn of 51%. And from the 46 that West Coast had, they ran only 37%, which obviously is never going to yield good result if you run that poorly on the inside. They won the hit-out game, West Coast, quite convincingly, 48 to 36, but they coughed up 8 less clearances, 40 to 32, with centre clearance, Hawthorn winning 14 to 8. Contested and uncontested is actually rather close. It's not split by much at all. 4 more contested for Hawthorn, but 5 less uncontested. Hawthorn actually turned the ball over more as well. Eagles taking 62 marks for the game and only limiting Hawthorn to 87, which is down on their seasonal average. Hawthorn's a very big marking team, so I think they did incredibly well there. And pressure gauge around the contest, West Coast 56 tackles, 6 of which were inside 50. Hawthorn laid 72, 14 of which were inside 50. It was pretty clean cut. It was an absolute beat up. You can take it as you will. Hawthorn walking away with a very big win. And this is where things got a little bit complicated, because I feel, again, you can throw a blanket over so many players in this game from Hawthorn to give votes to. Josh Ward, Blake Hardwick, Lloyd Meek, Mitch Lewis, Harry Morrison even had a serviceable game. Jai Newcomb didn't have his biggest output, but he was still serviceable in the role. And for West Coast, Tim Kelly and Milan Murdoch played exceptionally well. But here's the 3 I landed on. I am going to be giving Dylan Moore the 1 vote. He had 22 disposals, 7 contested, 5 marks, 5 tackles, 505 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and 8 score involvements. The 2 votes I'm giving to Will Day. 23 disposals, 10 contested, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 420 metres gained, 2 goals, and 7 score involvements. And best on ground for me in a much improved season, probably one of, if not Hawthorn's most improved player, Connor McDonald. 23 disposals, 8 contested, 6 marks, 5 tackles, 4 clearances, 453 metres gained, 1 goal assist, and a game-high 10 score involvements. What did we learn? West Coast, I feel, out of Richmond, Essendon, I'll even throw in Port Adelaide, they're the most primed to step out of the rebuild phase now, because I think the young talent they got is going to sustain them for a very long time. It's just, with a young team, you are going to run into roadblocks like this, and you can't let it get you down. And you've seen the passion from some of these kids, you know, getting out there and being teary-eyed and crying after losses because they just bleed for this club and they want more. It's going to come. This is a team that I said a few weeks ago, and I'll reiterate again, within the next 2 years, definitely going to be wildcard contending. They could even pull it off next year. We've seen weirder shit happen. For Hawthorn, top 4. It's now in their hands. Do they do any damage? Do they go out in straight sets? It is all up to them. Their best is amongst the best. They've got the best defense in the competition, which is going to stonewall anybody that runs into them. but we've seen time and time again that midfield can get opened up way too easily. And with some of the midfields that are running around in finals contention this year, it could be very damning for Hawthorn at the end of the day. With all the games spoken about and analysed and dissected, this is how the AFL ladder at the end of the home and away season for 2026 finally shapes up. Finishing as minor premiers, to no surprise, Fremantle in first place on 76 points. In second place on 72 points, we have the Sydney Swans. Brisbane then trail them in third place, and Hawthorn in fourth place on 64 apiece. The top six is rounded out with Geelong in fifth and Adelaide in sixth, both on 60 points, with Melbourne in seventh place on 60 as well, but out of that top six purely on percentage. And I've said all year, percentage with wildcard now is going to play such a big factor into how things go down. The Bulldogs lock up 8th place with 54 points rather. Collingwood finish in 9th on 52, and Carlton rounds out the wildcard round with 50. And as I said, that does mean the wildcard round will see Melbourne taking on Carlton and Western Bulldogs taking on Collingwood. St Kilda finish in 11th on 40 points, trailed by GWS in 12th, who finish on the same. We then have Gold Coast in 13th and North Melbourne in 14th, both on 36 points. Port Adelaide finish in 15th on 28, West Coast finish in 16th on 16, 17th place Richmond finish on 12, and Essendon finish in 18th place on 8 points. For the final time for the home and away season, there are two things for us to do before the round can officially be recapped. That is to reveal the final top 10 leaderboard for the MVP award for the 2026 season, as voted by myself, which obviously is subjective, and some people might not give a shit, but hey, I've been enjoying it, and reveal my team of the week for round 24, which was a bit hard to put together this week. And seeing some of the other teams of the weeks that have been put together, I think I might have stiffed some people, but some people might have been stiffed being not included in theirs, so we'll see how we roll. But to kick things off, this is how the leaderboard for the MVP award finished at the conclusion of the home and away season. Working his way into 10th place on 17 votes, we have Isaac Rankin. In 9th place on 19 votes, Jai Newcomb, Jason Horne-Francis, and Patrick Cripps. In 8th place on 21 votes, Nasiah Wangani-Malira and Lockie Neal. In 7th place on 22 votes, Zach Butters. In 6th place on 23 votes, Jordan Dawson. In 5th place on 24 votes, Luke Jackson, Will Ashcroft, and Max Gawn. In 4th place on 30 votes, Isaac Heaney and Marcus Bontempelli. In 3rd place on 34 votes, Bailey Smith. In 2nd place on 35 votes, Harry Sheasel. And having locked it up in the previous round, but solidifying it this week, is Collingwood's Nick Dacos, winning on 41 total votes. And we're not even messing around. This is my team of the week that I selected for round 24. In defence, I have John Noble and Tom Stewart in the back pockets and James Sicily at full back, with Bodie Hewland and Callum Mills on the half-back flanks and Jacob Wietering at centre half-back. On the wings, I have Errol Goulden and Jace Burgoyne, with Bailey Smith in the centre, with Max Gawn as ruck, Marcus Bontempelli as ruck rover, and Lockie Neal as rover. My forward line sees Ben Keys and Isaac Rankin on the half-forward flanks and Mitch Georgiades at centre half-forward, with Logan Morris and Sean Manor in the forward pockets and Riley Thilthorpe at full forward. My interchange has Noah Anderson, Touk Miller, Ben Ainsworth, Connor McDonald, and Taylor Walker. This week's coach of the round is Josh Fraser, and this week's assistant coach of the round is Dean Cox. For the final time for the 2026 home and away season, the round has officially been recapped. Do thank you for joining me as always. If you did enjoy, hit that like button down below. If your team has made finals and finished in the top 6, congratulations. If they finished in the wildcard round, I hope you guys are anticipating a big week just like I am, and for any other teams that finished underneath that, commiserations. Let's hope 2027 is a bigger year. I'll still be doing tipping and round recaps for the final series, so stay tuned for that. The next video I drop will be my tipping video for the wildcard round, which will only will not only rather show my tips for the wildcard round, but it's going to reveal the winner of the tipping competition and how poorly I tipped the final round, which is very upsetting. I had a big fall from grace, but we had some big things go down in the tipping comp, so stay tuned for that. And following that, I'm going to absolutely rip the All-Australian team apart, and I'm going to reveal my own. And it's always fun doing really subjective things like that, so I hope you guys are on board. As always, now that we're coming to the pointy end of the season, finals is inbound. Pre-season, off-season, trade period, draft period. So many video ideas are going to be thrown around. But if you guys have any ideas for videos you would like to see me do, I'd appreciate it if you let me know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, get on board the community we are building here, people. Hit that subscribe button as well. Let's build this thing into something much larger. Let's create a community of AFL-loving people that just want to come together and enjoy the sport together. At the end of the day, that's what I'm doing this for, and I would love if you took the time to consider getting on board. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.